keep on working on the front end of our to-do list. All right, so we have the submit function that sends the form data to the API. We don't have the API workings yet. The only thing that we're doing on the API so far is within the auth controller, we are sending the DTO to the signup function, and then we're console logging it, okay? We will work on the backend a little bit later, but right now what I wanna work on is this next item in my user story, which is adding data validation, okay? So I'm gonna add data validation in 2 places. I'm gonna add it first on the front end in our sign up form, okay? You want to validate data as quickly as you can. So I want to make sure that when I click submit, I'm not going to waste a request to the back end and that time to validate the data when I could just do it here, okay? Now, I will also validate the data on the back end, and I will sanitize the data on the back end, but I don't need to do it only on the back end, because if I can avoid doing the request, then I will, okay? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start thinking about how we want to validate the data, okay? So the first thing that I noticed that I don't love is if I'm adding Callie Stoscup, right? Callie Stoscup at gmail.com, Callie Stoscup, and then my password, okay? I don't like that this stays as it is, okay? That doesn't really make sense to me. It should clear after I click submit. So that's the first thing that I'm going to edit, all right? Not really about validating the data, but that bothered me when I looked at it after our last submit, and so I want to change that. So the way that I'm going to change it is I'm going to use the value prop, and I'm going to make the value equal to the state for each one. So the value for this one should be equal to name. The value for this one should be equal to email. The value for this one should be equal to username. And the value for this one should be equal to password. All right. Now, when I initially load the page, let's take a look at how this is working. All of these are just empty strings, so all of the values that go into the input box are empty strings. But if I would say test here, you're gonna see that test pops up there. So you're gonna need to make sure that the initial state is set properly, okay? Now, the next thing that you wanna do to clear the responses when, like clear these input fields when you send the response, is you're going to want to set the name back to an empty string. And then you're gonna wanna do the same thing with the rest of the fields. So set email back to an empty string. Set username back to an empty string. And set password back to an empty string. All right? So I can go ahead and I can type in Callie Stoscup, Callie Stoscup at gmail.com, Callie Stoscup, and my password. And then now when I submit, it's gonna clear the fields because I set the name, email, username, and password back to empty strings. Okay, so I like that so far. So I'm feeling pleased. All right, so the next thing that we wanna do is we want to consider when we can submit, okay? So we're just going to take it one field at a time. I need a name. That is going to be something that is mandatory for those signing up, okay? So the first thing that I can do is go to my Chakra UI and I can look at what I have available to me from the input field, okay? So I'm going to look for required, and that prop doesn't seem to be popping up. I'm gonna go look at form control and see what's going on there, because Why create something from scratch when we can use Chakra UI and their capabilities? All right, so Chakra UI exports 4 components of form control. So form control is going to be the wrapper around everything else. Form label is the label of the form section, okay? Helper text and error message. All right, so I'm already seeing that my texts that I'm using here could be replaced with form label. All right, that's exciting. Okay, so here is an example of the usage, okay? Form control, all right, form label email address, input type email, and then there's helper text, okay? All right, looks like you can use all of the different types of inputs for it. All right, and then here is going to be an example of our error message. All right, so let's take a look. Our input is type email. The value is going to be what we put in our input. Okay, that makes sense. Handle input change, so we already have that. Okay, on change, we already have that. That makes sense. All right, so this is kind of the piece that we're missing, right? Is error, okay, is errors if input is blank, okay? So you'll notice that is error starts out as blank, so it's going to error. But if I fill it in, right, now input is not an empty string, so is error is false, okay? So then it's going to show the helper text instead. All right, let's keep taking a look. All right, so it looks like we can add is required to the fields, to the form control in order to add this little asterisk here, okay? All right, the red asterisk can be overwritten. Okay, that's good to know. All right, so these are number inputs. Okay, and then it looks like form control is invalid. And then here we are using button type submit. Okay, so I'm gonna go up to, it looks like the most helpful portion of the docs for what our purpose is right now is this error message, okay? So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm going to use form control, okay? What I think I would do is I'm gonna just copy and paste this whole thing, and then I'm going to leave the rest of what I have because I'm gonna experiment with it first, and then I'm going to see if it works how I want it to before I start changing my code, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to edit all of my imports, okay? Looks like we need an is error, so let's go ahead and make that. I'm gonna call it is error name. Okay, so that looks good. And then I'm gonna change this here to is error name. I'm gonna try to replace the name portion first, and then I can move on to the rest of them. But I'm gonna try to do a test before I actually replace any of my code to make sure that it works as I want it and I'm not overthinking anything. Okay. Enter your name. Okay, let's take a look. All right, so this has, all right, name. Okay, so name is required, then I start typing in and it looks good. Perfect. Okay, I feel like we don't necessarily need the helper text for name because I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory. So I'm gonna change this to null and test it out. Okay, so if I have nothing in there, it's gonna go red and it's gonna say name is required. But then if I type in, it's gonna be fine. Okay, I like that. What I don't love though is I feel like I don't want it to be a bunch of red when you like first look at the form. So I think I'm going to try to edit that and not have is error from the jump be based on an empty value. Okay, so I think I'm going to change this to null, and this is going to have some issues, okay? But that is okay. I'm going to set the name back to null here. Okay. And I'm going to say value is name or empty string. Name is possibly null. That is true. So I think I'm going to say, let's see if we can do this instead. If name exists, then we'll have it be name, or we'll have it be an empty string. Okay. I'm going to comment this out here. All right. So now this kind of looks good. So we don't have any error message, but if I type something, I'm good. And then if I get rid of what I typed, it's going to be mad at me because now it's empty. Okay. So I need to think this through now. So I don't know. I want it to be when I click the submit, that is when it's going to check if this is empty. So it doesn't actually make sense to start out with null. It does make sense to start out with single quotes because we are looking for empty quotes and we do want to validate if it's an empty string, okay? What we want to do is we want to add an additional state. So I'm going to add an additional state called submit clicked, set submit clicked. And then I'm going to use state and I'm going to start with false. Okay? All right. So basically what I'm going to do then is I'm going to change this here from value name or name empty. All right, so we're just going to keep this as name, but we're going to say is air name. We need to edit that. Okay, so is air name is going to be name is equal to string and okay, submit is clicked. Okay, but let's call this submit clicked. Okay, is true. Okay, so at this point, submit clicked is not true, but it is empty. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to add the action here to set submit clicked to true when we click submit. Okay, so I want to do that before the Axios request because I'm going to add validation after. So we're going to say set submit clicked is true. Okay, so now if I click submit, and this is empty, it's going to error and say name is required. All right, I type it in, that error message goes away. Okay, so feeling good. All right, so then I need to think it through because now if I get rid of it, submit is still clicked is true and it's going to go back to error. So I need to figure out, like, do I like that or do I want it to be like when they submit again? So it's only going to be on submit. I think that's how I would want it to be. So anytime that they go to change a value, I want to set submit clicked back to false. So these are questions that you would ask your product and your design person. If you don't get this sort of information in the design and in the user stories, this is where you would ask what they want you to do, right? Because like you're not necessarily making the decisions on this. On here, this is your application, so you make these decisions. But when you're at work, the product will be making these decisions, and this is the type of question that you would ask them. Okay, so let's refresh the page. All right, if I go to submit, it's gonna yell at me about my name. But when I start typing, it's gonna set as submit is false now, okay? But now let's say I delete this and I click submit, it's gonna be mad at me again. All right, I think this is good. But if I see how I got rid of it, it's not going to be mad at me until I click submit. And that's what that setting submit clicked is false is about. Okay. So now that I have like the workflow that I want, right? The next thing I need to decide is if I want this form control to have required. And let's take a look. Is required. Okay. Do I like the asterisk? Honestly, I kind of feel like the asterisk is helpful. So I'm going to leave the asterisk, and that's this is required field here. So now we can go ahead and we can edit our other form fields to do the same things, okay? All right. Keep in mind, though, that the Axios request is still happening, so we are going to have to add that logic to the on submit function, right? Because if I click submit, it's going to error out, but it still sent information to the back end, and I don't want it to be sending information to the back end, okay? But I'm going to fix my form fields, and then we'll look into that, okay? So next, I can go ahead and delete this because my new one works, okay? And then let's copy this and let's add it here. Okay, so we are going to want this to be email. And then, input type. Let's make sure that's text, okay? Value is going to be email. On change, we're going to on change email. And then we need to, I'm going to say a valid email address is required because we are going to validate that it minimally has the @ sign. We can go ahead and look into that in a little bit. But I'm going to validate for a valid email address, not just that the field is filled in, okay? So we then can go ahead and add is air email, and that's going to be equal to email is blank and submit is true. All right, then we are going to change this to is air email and is air email. All right, so let's refresh the page. Okay, so far so good. I'm gonna go ahead and comment that out. Okay, so if I just submit, we're ready to get our error messages. Name is required, a valid email address is required, okay? If I start typing in my name, that's going to get rid of that, okay? And then if I click submit, I'm going to have issues. Okay, so clearly now that I've done the logic for 2, my logic is off, right? Because when I click submit, my email wasn't invalid, so I shouldn't be getting that message, okay? So we kind of have to look into it a little bit and see where we are off. All right, I think we need to we need to comment out our Axios request because it's going to make them empty after. Okay, and then we need to add the set submit false for the email too. All right, now let's take a look. So this is why I also just do testing at each change of code. Anytime you change your logic, go check to see if it works. Okay, so we're going to submit. It's mad at us. We want to go in and type in our name. All right, now it should just be mad at email. That makes sense. And then we want to type in calliestoscup@gmail.com. And now if we click submit, it's not mad. Okay, that's good. Now I need to think about whether or not I like that. So if I click submit here, right, it's mad about name and email. But then the second I start typing in here, it's going to change submit clicked equals to false, which means that it's clearing all of the fields, all of the error messages. Okay, so we need to think about whether or not we like that feature. Okay, the opposite of that would be to either get rid of the submit clicked, or we would want to do submit clicked and then add like submit clicked name, submit clicked email, submit clicked, and so on. So I'm going to try that first and see if that works. I think it seems like a messy option, but we can always refactor. We want to just make it work how we want it to work, and then we can look at whether or not it's pretty or efficient or maintainable, okay? Nope, and then this one should be email. All right, but we just want it to work. We want it to work how we want it, how we want the user to be able to experience it, and then we can always edit after. Okay, so if I click here, a name is required, an email address is required. I want this to go away when I start typing, but I don't want it, and then I want this to go away when I start typing. Perfect, that is how I want it to function, okay? If I click submit, it's gonna work. If I get rid of this and then click submit, yep, it's gonna be mad at me. If I get rid of this and click submit, it's gonna be mad at me. If I start typing in here, that's gonna go away, but the name field is going to stay. Okay, that works as I expected, and then this works as I expected. So what I would do now is I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing for username and password, and then I'm gonna test, does this all work as expected? Okay, in terms of showing me my error messages how I want it to, okay? And then I can go ahead and look into how to make it better. All right, so that looks good. So I can then go ahead and delete that. And then I am going to add another field, okay? So we need to add, we're gonna need to add a few things here, okay? So I'm gonna add a space between that, and then we're gonna say set submit clicked username. All right. And we're going to need to do const is error username equals username. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add password too, because so far everything is working with the first two, so I think I'm at a point where I can add the second two fields at the same time. And then we will test all of them. Okay, that looks good so far, hopefully. And then we can change this around. So is error username. The form label is going to be username, and the type is going to be text. The value is going to be username, and on change, we are going to be doing on change username is error username. And then we want to do username is required. Okay, let's copy this. And we're going to fix this now for password. Is error password. I want this to be password. The type is password. The value is password. On change password. is error password. Also, you could select all of this at once, but because of all my casing being different, I'm not going to. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and comment out these. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. So if I click submit, all right, we don't have this. We forgot to add the changing of the state, right? So when we change the username, then we want to do that. And then on submit, we want to set user name and password clicked as true. Okay, let's refresh the page. So if I click submit, perfect. I'm saying name is required, a valid email address is required, username is required, password is required. Okay, I'm gonna end up probably changing my password field here to explain how many fields I want or characters I want and stuff like that. I just don't have that decision made up yet. I also will need to add another one another field here to verify that the passwords match, okay? But right now, I'm just going to test that this works how I intended. All right, so name is required, so we enter Callie Strohscup, and that goes away. Perfect. Submit, still get errors on those. Email is required, so we're gonna say we're typing calliestrohscup@gmail.com. As I start typing, email gets better. Submit, good. I'm gonna say my username is Callie Strohscup. Perfect. And then my password is going to just be a password. And as I type, it goes good. If I delete something, it works. If I delete another thing, it works. If I start typing, it goes away. All right, I feel pretty good about the fact that all of these are now required fields, and I can't, it's going to give me my error message if it's blank. The thing though is it's not going to not send the request right now. I mean, it's not sending the request because the code is commented out to send the request, but we want to make it actually validate, right? So we don't want to send here if is error true for any of them, okay? So we're going to say if error, is error name or is error email or is error username or is error password. So if any of those are errors, okay, then we are just going to return, okay? Otherwise, right, if all of them are not errors, then we are going to make our request, okay? So I'm going to restart my API here so that way we can see the logs if it's coming through or not, okay? So the idea is that we are just going to do nothing if any of these are errored, okay? Because our error handling here is already going to show us. Otherwise, if there are no errors, then we will make the post request, okay? So let's refresh and give it a try. So let's actually do here, instead of returning, let's do console log errors, okay? And then let's bring that up too. All right, so if I click submit, well, that did not work as intended. So let's debug a little bit, okay? So we're gonna console log is error name. All right, I'm going to just console log that one because they all work pretty much the same. So let's see what happens and go from there. Okay, error name is false. Okay, but it should be true. Name is blank and submit clicked name. True. Okay, so here's what's happening. This is being set as submit name true, but the is error is not getting updated quickly enough because we're in the same, like we're doing it right after we're checking within the same function, okay? So that is going to make it difficult to do immediately. So one of the ways that we can fix this is by making functions that set these as true outside of the function. And the other way that we can do it is by using just this portion of things here. Because submit will automatically be true if we're in the submit function. So instead of is error true, we could do this here. Okay, like that. And let's refresh the page. And now you can see that we're gonna get errors here because name is blank. Does that make sense? So we could kind of do this in two different ways. We could try to get is error name to be updated more quickly and valid in this portion here, okay? Or we can go ahead and just put what this portion is, okay? So we will need to think about that. I think I'm going to start out with just adding this portion to my if statement instead, because that's going to make it work. And then I'm going to make it better later, because all of these things, email is going to be an error. If it's more than just email is blank, I'm going to end up making a function here. So I'm just going to replace with what I have for now, and then we'll edit as we need to. Okay. All right, so let's refresh. So we're saying if any of these things are blank, then we're going to log error. Otherwise, we are going to send the request. So let's restart our service, so that way we can. All right. So if I click submit, perfect. I don't see a log here and I see an error here. All right, let's just try to put name in. All right, and then click submit. All right, still an error because we need all of these things, right? So let's add an email. Submit, still an error. All right, perfect. All right, so now once I got all of the things added, it went ahead and submitted for me, which is great, okay? The issue now that I see is that we clicked submit and it sent the response, and then it set all of these things to empty strings, which then made it look like there is an error, okay? So I would think through now what's happening when I do this. So let's go look at our wireframe to see what has to happen, okay? So when we create an account and then we click submit, it's gonna redirect to projects, okay? So when I click submit, it's not gonna stay on this page. So I could go ahead and set like the names back to strings, and then I could go also and set my submit clicks as false, okay? So I'm going to do that So that way it works on this page, but keep in mind that you're redirecting to another page afterwards. So potentially it's not necessary to do this, because then when you load the form again, it's going to set the name equal to empty strings and set these equal to false because it's going to be loading the component. I hope that makes sense. But I want to make sure that everything is foolproof, so I am going to do it. All right, now I'm going to try again. So I'm going to try to submit. It's mad at me. Then I'm going to click submit. All right, perfect. That looks great. Okay, so I did that, but here's the issue, right? We want to send an email to the user welcoming them to our to-do list application, but I was just able to add email as test. So that's not really how I want it to work, right? I also need to make sure that I have them retype their password so it gets verified and they don't have to reset their password a bunch, okay? So we are going to work on validating each of the individual fields in the next video. So I will see you in a little bit.